Okay, so how do jiu-jitsu athletes grease? A couple of ways. Usually, they don't put Vaseline; they put like Johnson and Johnson lotion on because it stays on longer. It's like thinner, so it will seep into the pores better. And so how they do it is they don't like I've had people who just like grease like right before and then they come out greased. But usually what they do is they'll rub the lotion in like an hour to 2 hours beforehand, so that it dries into the skin. Then they'll do a light warm up. They'll towel themselves down so they're not really sweating anymore. So then when they do the pre-fight grease check, if there is one, they're dry. Then the second they start sweating, the pores open up and the lotion comes out. And the second the lotion comes out, you just absolutely cannot hold on to anybody. It's a real big difference. It's like basically the friction difference between like training in the gi and training no gi, like shirtless. Like it's a huge difference. If you don't believe me, don't just put lotion on. Put lotion on, 10 minutes later, get a sweat going. Once you're sweating, mix with the lotion, then roll with your buddy and have him try to hold on to you. And if you want to get real risky, do it shirtless, and you'll see. Greasing is a serious fucking problem. Another way guys do it is, what they'll do is if they have grease checks and they want to do a strong warm-up, because let's say a lot of guys put the lotion on, they do a light warm-up, so they're not really that sweaty, and they come out and they compete. One thing guys will do as well is they'll take like a bucket or a tub the night before the match, and they'll lay backwards and they'll put their hair in the tub, so only the top of their head and their hair and their scalp get wet with usually baby oil if they're going to do that on their hair, and they'll let the baby oil soak for a certain amount of time into their head, and they'll go to sleep and they'll have it dry into their scalp. The next day when they go to warm up, they'll wear a hat or a beanie or a hoodie, so that when they sweat, the initial grease just sweats and it runs into the hat, so then your body's dry. So then your body has no grease on it. Then the second you start sweating, the baby oil runs from the hair down onto the face, and then it rubs into the whole body when you start grappling. So that's another way to do it. But just experiment with it. Lotion yourself up and have your buddy try to hold on to you while you stall. Now, how do we solve this is the question. Long sleeve rash guards and spats are definitely a great way to do it, but there has to be a two-tiered approach to greasing, right? Because if you get caught greasing in a match, it's hard to DQ a guy, which I think you should DQ them anyways. If you're doing like a professional event, like, you know, it's hard to tell investors, whoever the case is, oh yeah, we DQ'd, you know, the final or the main event match ended in a DQ because the guy was greasing. Like, that's kind of a bad look for a professional event. And there's no points, obviously. And the penalties don't really mean much in a who's number one, like, rule set. So it has to be a two-tiered approach, okay? And it can't just be a financial penalty. Like, I think if you get caught greasing, like, blatantly Nikki was greasing today, and, you know, Penna complained about it like 6 times. I think you should get between a 50 and a 75% purse reduction. Now, that's the first tier, because even if you get a 75% purse reduction, like let's say Joe Schmo is making $10,000 to fight me, right? And he's greased, and they catch him greasing, and they take away 75% of his purse. And for whatever reason, let's say Joe Schmo ends up on my back, and he's got grease all over him, and I have a defensive hand in place, and I'm holding on. It's a grip that usually works, but there's grease, so the grip doesn't work, and he rips his hand out with the grease, and he shoots under my neck, and he strangles me. If that guy makes $10,000, or however much money he makes, and he loses 75% of that purse, let's say he loses $7,500, and he goes home with $2,500. The brand recognition that he's going to get and the money that he's going to make from beating me is going to be 1,000,000 times whatever money he lost because of the fact that he was greased. So you can't just take money away from the guy, because if they use the grease to beat a high-profile name, the purse doesn't matter. Like, even if a guy's making $100,000, which nobody is, and he loses 100% of his purse, but he beats me, he's still going to generate more than the $100,000 just because he beat me, right? So it can't be just a financial penalty. It has to be a financial penalty where the other athlete gets part of their purse, okay? And it has to be a penalty in the match, which will make it harder for the person to win the match. Whether it's EBI overtime and you're adding, a minute to the ride time or whatever the case is, or you're taking escape time off, whether it's ADCC points and you get like, you get like 3 negatives or something, or it's who's number one and you get like 3 negatives, or, the judges score it very heavily negatively against the guy who's greasing. There needs to be a 2-tiered approach where not only do you lose money, but it also makes it harder to lose the match. And long sleeve spats and rash guards obviously would make a big difference. And I've literally seen Nicky Rod when he was on my team. There's like those pink bottles of like Baby Johnson lotion. Like an hour and a half before he competes, he just rubs it all over his head, his hair, his face, all over his body. And then it dries, and then he goes out and he's impossible to get a hold of. And the problem is that he's got just good enough wrestling with the combination of the grease to be hard to take down. So like if you try to hold any grips on him in the standing position, or you try to hold on to even a collar tie, it's just grease all over his body. The collar ties just slip off. You can pick up his leg, he just slips out right away because it's his leg, his calf basically, and his behind his knees, shorts on your forearm, and then the leg just like slips right out, right? So he's got good enough defensive stally wrestling combined with the grease to be hard to take down. And so then you just get into like a pushing match with them, because the pull-in grips don't really work, right? The more friction you have, the greater the pull-in grips work. The less friction you have, the more pushing grips you have to use.